Well, I'm very excited to be here, and just to let you know how excited I'm to be here. There's not many things that would make me leave lovely Boise, Idaho at the end of summer and come here to Washington, D.C. So I'm very excited to talk to you about some very innovative technology, some very innovative IT that perhaps you're also using in your own personal lives, and that is drones, and specifically drones for good. So let's talk a little bit about the Department of the Interior. And many of you may know about the Department of everything else, but so Department of the Interior comprised of 9 bureaus. Many of you know the National Park Service, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, U.S. Geological Survey, and so on. And so my organization provides that aviation support for all of those bureaus. So why drones for Department of the Interior? Well, we've actually got about 500 million reasons for drones. We're the largest single land steward in the United States. We have more land than DOD and any other organization. And that's all public land. And as you can see from this video, a lot of it is out west in Alaska, some very severe terrain and remote areas and very sensitive landscapes. We're responsible for some of those very precious places that you hopefully take your families on vacation. And so for us, drones provide an opportunity to have that airborne IT to do a lot of what we are chartered to do and do it in a very respectful way, not only to this land, but also to the people that own this land. That's every one of you. This is all public land. And so a couple things we're hoping to get out of those drones, and we'll talk about my time here, is the fact that we're closing some of the gaps in our performance as a result of drones. And even more exciting, we're leapfrogging to some real game-changing technology and applications for drones. So let's get moving. So what are we getting? So I've thought long and hard about this, and I've come up with these 4 S's. This really quantifies for us what drones are providing our agency. And it's sensing, safety, savings, and service. You know, I'm an aerospace engineer, I'm a former Navy pilot, but I got to tell you, drones are not about the vehicles, it's all about the data. It's an airborne IT node, and it's a wonderful airborne IT node. And the ability to get a variety of sensors from electro-optical to infrared to all manner of sensors up in the air and have them up there in a persistent manner, providing repeatable results that we can upload to the cloud and do all sorts of analytics on and archive that leads us to better science and better decisions of what to do and how to manage your land. Now, we're not really replacing a lot of folks that are flying those manned aircraft yet because of rules. We're not going outside of line of sight very much. I'll talk about where we are. But we are reducing the ground exposure to a lot of people who are out there in some of those very remote places, and we're getting them off the ground and making it safer. For hazards like floods, hurricanes, fires, we're now able to send those assets in where we would normally send men and women, so we're improving safety there. I'll talk about our fleet in a little bit, but you know, the acquisition cost of most of these drones, the operations, the training, parts, everything that goes along with buying these drones is much cheaper because of the technology and frankly the size. And then in our organization, we don't actually get 100% of the vote when we go out. We're tracking migration, we're tracking geological weather events, all sorts of things. And so we've got to be ready to go out. And taking a drone out in your backpack, perhaps in the back of your truck on a horse, much easier than contracting for a helicopter, fixed-wing airplane to get out there and do the same mission. So these are the reasons that we've applied drone technology in our mission space and what we're getting out of them. To date, Interior has demonstrated over 25 different mission areas, wildlife studies, fire suppression, perimeter mapping, fluvial mapping. I found out what that was all about, 3D modeling, all sorts of things. And we're continuing to explore different mission areas. I can tell you there isn't a mission area, commercial application that we either haven't already done, we've delivered some cargo, like Amazon hopes to do, or we don't intend to do in the future. We dart animals from helicopters, very dangerous mission for us and for the animals. We're thinking about doing that with a nice quiet drone, better for the animal and better for us. Along the way, what we've determined was that we kind of have a rule of thumb we've developed. Now, like most rules of thumb, some of the results are better and some are worse. But generally what we found is that when you take a drone and you replace some traditional way of doing it, whether it's on the ground or it's from the air, we're able to accomplish that mission in 1/7 the time and 1/10 the cost. And that's significant for us. And probably would be for you as well. So, where are we at in 2017? No pun intended, but our program is literally taking off. We've done over 7,000 individual flights this year, 1,200 hours. Our fleet, 245 unmanned aircraft. I think that's a lot. It's probably really expensive. The cost of that entire fleet is less than the cost of some of the single manned aircraft that we fly in our fleet. Like our manned pilots, we have a special program to qualify our unmanned pilots to fly in some of our more hazardous and risky missions. And they may not be hazardous and risky for the pilot in an unmanned aircraft, but they may be hazardous and risky for the asset and for things on the ground. So we have our own program. We've got over 200 folks there. We're also engaged in multiple what we call end product contracts. So perhaps I want to survey this area here, and I'm not going to tell you how to do it. We'll get a data contract out there, and if someone wants to use a drone, then they can use a drone. And we're also right now supporting hurricanes and wildfires, and we'll talk about that. What you're seeing there on the video is actually a 3D model that was taken from one of our small drones. Spent 3 days out there surveying Devil's Tower in Wyoming, and came up with that 3D model from stitching those photographs together. Very detailed. Our responsibility there is to go out and make sure that those monuments are not creating hazards for hikers and climbers, and we were able to do this in, again, 1/7 the time at 1/10 the cost. So let me talk a little bit about fire, because this is one of those areas where I really think that drones have a game-changing leapfrog capability. So just to put this in perspective about fire, we have about 75,000 starts a year. Right now it's about $1.5 billion just for suppression. We won't talk about rehab and preparations for that. And we burn about 6 million acres annually. That's a lot of space. And we kill firefighters, unfortunately, in doing that, protecting your communities. You may not realize this, but we're only flying on that fire 8 out of the 24 hours a day. We don't fly at night, and we don't fly usually in the morning until about 10, 11 o'clock, because the smoke is settled down in the valleys. It's tough to see. Also, about 20% of all the fires, they start after we've stopped flying. So they could go up to 16 hours without being touched. We map the fires at night, but those maps are often 18 to 24 hours old. And we don't have an outcome measurement right now for what that stuff does when it's on the ground. Water, retardant. And so there's a lot we don't know. And that's the current state of fire. This map at the bottom was taken September 5th and shows all the fires in the Northwest. And the smoke was so bad we were unable to fly for days except with unmanned aircraft. So talking about 2 types of drones on fire, where I think it's really a game changer. The first is small unmanned aircraft. Your traditional aircraft are doing intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance, and they do a variety of missions here. And we're looking at applications in the small units, giving them to fire teams at the divisional level, and then overhead is kind of an eye in the sky, AWACS, if you're familiar with that military platform. What you're seeing here is a demonstration we did in 2015. You can see a helicopter actually dropping water. This is in infrared. And today we've done over 350 flights on over 50 fires. And again, we're using infrared. We're able to not only map the fire, but we're able to see through the canopy, see through the smoke, and pick out those hot spots, which is helping us keep firefighters out of danger and also directing them to areas that they need to go to take care of the fire. Now, I'm a former test pilot, and one of the squadrons I commanded when I was in the Navy had these optionally piloted jet aircraft. And we used them for targets. We also used them for some some very hazardous tests in the unmanned mode, but we could fly them in the manned mode. And so we started exploring in 2014 the use of optionally piloted helicopters. So the Marine Corps developed this capability. This is a video from a K-MAX helicopter to take supplies to Marines in forward bases. Instead of going over the road and being exposed to IEDs, they went over the top with these unmanned helicopters delivering the supplies. So we asked if they could do the same with the helicopters on fire. What you're seeing here is a test just north of Boise. We were dropping water, and you could see through the smoke. When you go back to the electro-optical, all of a sudden you can't see anything. As I mentioned, we don't fight fire at night. We are not fighting it in the morning. We're also not supporting our ground firefighters, and those are the folks, the men and women who actually put the fire out, containing the fire. So $123 million is about the amount of money that DoD has already invested in this technology that we can leverage. By going 24 hours as opposed to 8 hours a day, we can triple the amount of time we're actively fighting that fire. And this helicopter technology has also got the ability to deliver supplies to our firefighters. And what that does is now gets them ready, because a lot of times they're waiting. There's no aviation out there, and they're ready to go, except they need supplies, and we can't get it to them. So this particular helicopter has a little carousel arrangement, can drop loads at 4 specific locations by GPS. And the other thing that's really nice, we'd be flying this within the fire traffic area, within the temporary flight restriction, so we're allowed to go beyond visual line of sight in there, which is very nice for us. But we are concerned about the number of assets we've got on the fire, and this would allow us to have a 0 increase in the amount of helicopters on that fire, because we'd fly these same helicopters during the day with all the manned tankers in the manned mode. And then at night, we'd switch to the unmanned mode, and we think actually one of those unmanned pilots could fly 3 of them at once, just keeping track as they're going around their pattern. And then in the morning, it would continue flying unmanned, and then we'd go back. And then when the fire's out, we'd put that pilot back in there, and we'd fly to the next fire. So we'd avoid all of the current restrictions. And there's a lot of good things about this. And one of the best things about this is the fact that at night, in the early morning, the wind is down, the temperature drops, and the relative humidity goes up. It makes the fire its most vulnerable. And so, you know, we think that there's an opportunity to really be a game changer in the wildland fire. So what could that do for us? Well, here's some graphs of, these were 2014 numbers, but every 10% we reduce the amount of suppression and we reduce the scope of what's burned. It's $152 million, and probably more important, folks in the West, 400,000 acres that we could save, just in 10%. And mind you, we're tripling the amount of time that we would get out there on the fires. I want to end, though, with back where I started. This is all about the data. And, you know, DoD found out that it was 24 times the amount of data. And so there are other things that go along with this that we're exploring. I've talked about some very cool things, but things like machine learning and processing in the cloud and the distribution of that. You know, we can't afford to hire 24 times the number of folks to do analysis. And so we're relying on those things. We make sure that the data is relevant, that it has a utility. We want to make sure we have the capability, not just in the drone, but on the ground, to receive it, to process it, to use it, to share it, you know, across the agencies. And we're very big into security and privacy. You know, it's your land, and so we're very big when we go out to make sure that we have ensured that folks know what we're doing. Most folks think it's really cool what we do out there, managing that land. And then in the security, and that security is both in the control links. You know, we have encrypted control links and encrypted payload links. And we do something that most Americans don't do. We actually read the privacy statements and user agreements of all of the drones and software we buy, and there's some we have not touched as a result of what they put in their privacy statement. So I just want to make sure that we're all focused on that's a really important part of drones. That's what they're all about. And with that, thank you very much.
has a fabulous job and a great mission, huh? That's amazing. So now I want to introduce our second Tech Talk from Kelly Chewbacca, who this is, I think, her second event with us, and she was a real fan favorite the last time. So she's the Chief Data Officer at the Office of Inspector General at the U.S. Postal Service, and she's going to talk about some interesting things that they are doing using technology. So welcome, Kelly.
Connie. Good morning. I want to talk to you today about how we are leveraging IT innovation for government oversight. I'm Kelly Chewbacca, like the Star Wars character, so there's no confusion about that going forward. Okay. All right, so today I want to give you an overview of what the Postal Service OIG is. I want to demystify data analytics for you and then leave you with some jaw-dropping examples, which will make it worth your time to have shown up so early this morning. Thank you. My goal today really is just to inspire you. So let's go. The Postal Service OIG, this story starts about, let's round to 30 years ago in Alaska. I was born there, grew up there. My mom was an auditor for one of the oil companies. She would manually go through source documents to look for indicators of fraud. And then I remember when she made $1 million audit find, which is the biggest audit find in company history. We went out to dinner and celebrated. I also remember many winters being taken into the office on the weekends and going through those documents with my mom, and she would tell me, I want you to look for any numbers over this, and I would take a ruler. And you remember the paper with the holes on the side, right? Okay, so imagine me as a 10-year-old. I had the world's biggest glasses with a ruler, and I'm Excel native, and I'm going through and I would highlight any lines that looked like indicators of fraud. I had no idea what I was doing. But now I'm walking in my mother's footsteps. At the Postal Service OIG, we also audit for fraud, among other things. So our mission is to enhance the efficiency and effectiveness of the Postal Service. Okay, stop laughing. Efficiency and the effectiveness of the Postal Service, and also to detect and deter waste, fraud, and abuse. So we do that through about 150 audits of programs and operations each year, and about 4,000 investigations of allegations of waste, fraud, abuse, or misconduct. But in order to understand how awesome our office is, you have to understand the Postal Service. So if you've not worked in the Postal Service, let me blow your mind for a little bit. The Postal Service does about $70 billion in revenue every year. It has about $13 billion in contracts every year and 600,000 employees. Well, first, I had no idea when I joined the Postal Service that it was that complicated. But second, imagine all the opportunities for improvements in programs and operations and detecting and deterring waste, fraud, and abuse. So our Office of Inspector General has an important, critical, and sometimes seemingly impossible mission. And one of the ways we do that in an era of dwindling budgets, I don't know if you've heard that we have dwindling budgets in the federal government, and we have an ever-evolving mailing industry, and we have increasingly sophisticated criminals. The way we have found to do our mission better is by using data analytics. What is data analytics? Okay, I've got a confession for you. About 4 years ago, I didn't know either. Okay? I was just a lawyer by background, and I was working in Inspector General offices, and our Inspector General decided he was going to hire a data analyst instead of an auditor or an investigator. Why would you do that? It says in the IG Act, lawyer, says in the IG Act that we're supposed to do audits and investigations. There's nothing about data in the IG Act. And he said, no, hear me out. If we use data analytics, we will know what to audit and what to investigate. Because I got to tell you, the way we used to do oversight is we used to think, okay, where does the agency spend the most money and where does it get most of its revenue? Let's audit in those two areas. That makes sense. And from an investigation perspective, we would just wait until we got a complaint in, and then we would go and investigate the complaint. That makes sense. Except that think about all the things you're missing with that. So what we do in our office is we build data analytic models that can tell auditors where the areas are of the areas of greatest risk, so that they can target their audits in that direction. And we also give our agents really rich, valuable leads so that they know who to look at. Because I'll tell you, the sophisticated criminal, you're not going to get a call into the hotline saying, oh, I think you need to look at this person. They will find a way to evade the system, but our tools can pick them up. What does this look like practically? Predictive analytics, we use data analytics from the past to let us know something that might happen in the future. Geospatial analysis is putting things on maps to give us insights about what's going on. Machine learning, we use data analytics, so going through data in the past to inform a machine, which then takes off on its own and answers business questions we didn't even think of. Regression analysis, my college boyfriend used to talk about regression all the time. He was a math major. I'm like, wah, 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 wah. Okay, so what that means is we find variables that seem to not be causally related to an outcome, but they keep showing up the same time as the outcome, which means you can then just look for the variables and anticipate the outcome. You like how I did that? Thank you. Sentiment analysis, that's us just figuring out, you guys all do sentiment analysis. Figuring out how people feel about things. You use Yelp, you use Google reviews, you know how people feel about a business. That's data analytics. Look at you. Pretty awesome. And then advanced visualizations. You know how a picture's worth 1,000 words? Well, in our CDO office, we have pictures that are worth 1,000 terabytes. Okay. Let me show you what I'm talking about with our jaw-dropping examples. Last year, our data analytics tools were used by our auditors and agents in the OIG to come up with more than $920 million in findings. That's right. That's like $1 billion. And we're going to be close to that this year, too. So we're on a really good streak with our tools. We also gave over 530 leads to our agents, our criminal agents. Only one of those was an unfounded lead. There was nothing of substance there. So for me, that's an incredible win for our team because that means we're giving things of merit to our agents and we're not wasting their time. One of our agents in the OIG, he worked this particular case using one of our tools. So we developed a provider fraud tool. With those 600,000 employees, we spend about $1 billion in workman's comp every year. And that means that there's opportunity for fraud from the claimants, who are the employees, and the providers, who are the doctors and the pharmacies. Well, in this particular model, we assign a risk score on a scale of 1 to 1,000. 999 on this profile, it would be a very high risk score. This tells an agent that there's a very, very high risk or probability that there is fraud going on with this provider. Does it prove there's fraud going on with this provider? No, we still need agents and auditors to look into it because there can be very legitimate reasons why somebody's behavior is labeled high risk, but they're actually engaged in completely normal activity. Well, this guy wasn't. So what this guy did was he billed $2 million in workman's comp to one single Postal Service employee for services that he never provided. This resulted in a 3-year sentence for this particular provider and $1.8 million in restitution to the federal government. And the lead came from the data analytics model because the only person who knew that this guy was engaging in this fraud was the guy. And he forgot to call our hotline and tell us. So we wouldn't have known had we not used the data analytics tool. Pretty cool, huh? Similarly, we have a tool that we use for our contract fraud. We have $13 billion in contracts that we are magically responsible for overseeing. How do you do that? We chose to use a data analytics tool. What this model does is it shows all of the $13 billion in contracts on a risk scale, again from 0 to 100, red being high risk, green being low risk. And the picture I'm showing you is just our really, really high risk contracts. The size of the bubble is how big the contract is. So if you are an agent or an auditor in one of our regions through the nation, you can sit there and literally click on the bubbles down to the contract detail, which looks like this, for a contract that's at risk. So you'd have a risk number on the contract. It shows in the tool all of the invoices. You can click on each invoice and see what it was for, how it was paid, how many times the contract was modified, how many times it changed hands from a contracting officer representative. So much groundwork has already been done for you so that you as an auditor or an agent don't have to take your 10-year-old in to go through source documents. Thank you, you're welcome. But also you have all the foundation work set to determine whether this is actually worth your time. One of the other cool things we do, you'll see at the bottom, is a link analysis. A lot of times the person you're looking for isn't actually the person you're looking for. You know that because you've watched Law & Order. You know when they turn the witness against the bigger guy? Okay, so this is our turn the witness against the bigger guy option. So down at the bottom, you can see the person that I'm looking at's right there in the center, and then all of the contracts and people that that person's related to and their respective risk scores. Pretty awesome, right? Another thing we do, tripwires. A tripwire is just, think of it, okay, I'm going to demonstrate it. Criminal, dun-dun, dun-dun. right? Okay, it looks like that. So we use these data analytics tripwires where we look at 2 or 3 variables that are a strong indicator of criminal activity, put them together, and you have a pretty good idea that that person's probably engaged in something they shouldn't be engaged in. This tripwire I'm showing you is for after-hours transactions. So we have postal carriers running around. You're probably going to see more of them today because you just listened to me talk about it. So be more aware that there's postal carriers everywhere. Postal carriers are supposed to be done by a certain time. So what this model looks at is postal carriers who are delivering mail, so they're scanning mail after hours, or they are purchasing fuel after hours. And when that's happening at a consolidated rate over a short time, et cetera, there's probably something fishy going on there. Using this model, our agents have discovered things like overtime schemes, where the carriers would walk real slow during the day, and then all of a sudden they have to work overtime, so they get paid a lot more. Or they're filling up their personal vehicles using credit cards from the Postal Service. So they're getting fuel in their vehicles courtesy of the ratepayers. Thank you all for using the Postal Service. So we use this model to help our agents figure out who could be engaging in criminal activity. We also use email analysis. This is pretty cool. If you have a subject that you're looking at, or you have a senior level Postal Service person that you're looking at from an audit or an investigation standpoint, emails can be very telling. But let's say you get like 7 years downloaded of their email. The way we used to do this is we'd have a whole team of people stuck in a room clicking through each email. I may or may not have been part of those teams. I can neither confirm nor deny, but it is gruesome work. Now we use a data analytics tool for it. So in this case, we ran data analytics on Game of Thrones characters. So for those of you who don't know, this character's name's Daenerys, and she's an exiled princess who very much wants to get back on the throne. And so what we did is we wanted to find out who are her allies, either the ones we know about or they're covert. They're acting like they're not allies to everybody else, but they're actually helping her. Check out the people she's been emailing. That tells us a lot. On this slide, we can see how many emails she's sending every day from her little exiled location, and then we marked it with critical events in the character story. So you can see, just using this, when she's sending emails and when the spike in activity is, you could then drill down and see who she was sending them to. And if you look at the bottom, the actual content of each email, and on the far right, you'll see that we did a sentiment analysis. Think like Yelp, Travelocity, Google. Is this a positive or negative email? And then you could pull up even all her emails to one person. Is she mostly positive, mostly negative? Her emails around a certain event, mostly positive, mostly negative. Why does this matter? A lot of times we have to get inside the intent of people's minds when we're looking at criminal activity. What is your intent? What were you thinking? What did you know? And of course, if we don't have this tool and we don't have people going through it hand by hand, all we can rely on is what the subject says. And usually they don't tell the truth if they're engaged in something fishy. I also want to tell you something that's like breaking news, hot off the press. You were the first to hear it live. We have started using data analytics to engage in stopping drug trafficking through the mail. So if you aren't aware, there's a huge problem in the US right now with opioids. Fentanyl in particular is being shipped in from international shippers, and it's leading to alarming and increasing overdose deaths every year. What's fentanyl? It is a drug that is 50 times and up to 10,000 times as potent as morphine. And the trick is it can be mailed in small quantities or large quantities, and it's completely odorless, which makes it very, very difficult for law enforcement and customs to detect it. You may have heard the story about a police officer up in Ohio who did a drug bust. They found fentanyl. They were done at the end of the day. He was heading back to the precinct, and he had some dust on his uniform, and he brushed it off and overdosed. That's how serious this drug is. And it is being shipped in alarming quantities. We're not even sure how much. When it gets through customs, it enters the Postal Service stream, which means those 600,000 people are potentially being exposed to highly lethal doses of fentanyl every day. That's a real concern. What can we do about it? It's so overwhelming of a problem. Data analytics, dun, dun, dun. So we decided, okay, let's see. We've got this international data that's coming in. The Postal Service has just a couple months ago, started getting a lot more detailed electronic data in advance from international countries. And so we have that data set. We then happened to be part of a drug bust. One of our agents was part of a drug bust where we found a package in the Postal Service system that had fentanyl in it. So we used that package, ran it against the data set, and found who the shipper was and all the other people he has shipped packages to in recent months. So from one drug bust, we found 450 or so residential addresses here in the U.S. that have received packages from a guy we know has been shipping fentanyl. Does that mean all 450 plus packages were fentanyl? No. Does it mean some of them were? Probably. So we backtracked that. We took all 450 addresses, threw that against the data, and found another shipper who also has been shipping to some of the people on that list. And that shipper, when we looked into him, has shipped over 2,500 packages to the U.S. in recent months. Which means, using data analytics only with the lead from this one drug bust, we were able to identify 2,800 suspicious packages coming to specific residential addresses in the U.S. through the postal system mail in just a matter of weeks. Imagine the possibilities of what we can do with data analytics when we get various agencies who have authority for law enforcement, have authority for customs and border protection together around data analytics to stop this problem. It's really exciting, and the opportunities are endless. And that is how we are leveraging IT innovation for government oversight. Thank you.